with young people from primary schools all the way up to undergraduates about incorporating citizen science into their education practice and also including young people's voices within decision-making and the outcomes of citizen science to help draw these young people into the scientific process, to learn more about being an actively engaged citizen, but also to do with democracy. Citizen science throughout the last few years has certainly evolved, and through that has come some opportunities, but also some challenges. And today we are going to be mostly addressing, or at least discussing, just how we can build the next generation of young people to be more informed, have the skills to critically think and to make decisions on their own part, but to also to have their voices heard. They are the next generation, and they deserve to have a say in what happens next in this world. And that's enough from me. I'll first introduce the panel, and then finally our keynote for the day, who will be giving a 20-minute discussion on their practice of including the practices of democracy within citizen science. So today I'm going to be joined by Anna Berti-Suman, who is a researcher, lawyer, and activist on civic environmental monitoring at Luiz University, Rome. Also from Elizabeth Schauerman, who is a project manager at the OEAD, for the Center of Citizen Science, that provide trainings and resources as well as funding opportunities for education initiatives in Austria. I'm also, our final member of the panel is Cristina Nava, who is a project manager at Rio Nevera and also co-leader of a number of citizen science projects, most notably the Museum of Food Waste project, which was part of the Impetus Accelerator last year, but also received the Diversity and the Communities and Diversity Award at this year's European Union Prize for Citizen Science. But before we introduce those to the stage, it is my absolute honor to invite up for a 20-minute keynote Katja Meyer, who is a senior scientist at the University of Vienna and at the Center for Social Innovation. So thank you very much.
It's also an absolute honor to be here on stage, and I'll not overstretch the 20 minutes, don't worry. So good afternoon. I am a science and technology studies scholar, and I've come across citizen science first and foremost when I was interested in social innovation in science. So what can happen to science when we start changing the processes and start to make science more democratic, more participatory. And I also am here today because I'm part of the jury for this year's Citizen Science Prize, and I'm going to share some of my observations with you. So the title of my talk is deliberately a bit misleading. Can citizen science teach democracy? Well, actually, I don't think citizen science can teach democracy in the way we might teach history or grammar or mathematics traditionally. Democracy is not a subject. It's not something you simply learn about in a project or in a textbook. It's something you have to practice. But citizen science can help us to train, practice, and live democracy. And this is what I want to kind of introduce to you before we go into the discussion. Democracy is not only a system of institutions and elections, but as John Dewey or Chantal Mouffe remind us, it's a way of living together, a culture of participation, deliberation, and contestation. Today, this culture is permanently under pressure. Rising disinformation, polarization, declining trust in institutions, all those create an urgent need for practices that allow young people to train democratic engagement in everyday life. So my personal entry point to this theme is not only as a researcher, as I said, science studies, who welcomes citizen science as some new stuff for old school science, but also as a mother. Raising a child in an age of disinformation, AI has hallucinations, as we have heard in a talk before, the loss of collective realities, conspiracy theories, and deep social divides makes me acutely aware of how even more urgent democratic learning and critical thinking have become. If we want young people to be able to handle these uncertainties, as Chris has also noted, we need spaces where they can experiment with asking questions, working together, and handling disagreements constructively. And I argue here, citizen science can be such a space. So, what is citizen science? In the broadest sense, citizen science is public participation in research. This can range from contributing observations of birds, plants, in terms of biodiversity, for example, to help classifying galaxies online, to, even though more rarely, co-designing entire research projects with communities. Many of you will know iconic projects like Galaxy Zoo, for example, where volunteers classify galaxies, or the famous eBird project, which has become one of the world's largest biodiversity databases used by scientists. But citizen science is not only natural sciences. Projects like Transcribe Bentham, where volunteers transcribe historical manuscripts, or Mapping for Change, where communities co-create maps of local issues, show how the humanities and social sciences are important participatory research areas. Alan Irwin distinguished two traditions: science for citizens, which means making science more useful to publics, and science with citizens, involving publics directly in producing knowledge. However, unfortunately, citizen science is today still often framed, also in context of projects like eBird or Galaxy Zoo, as just a way to generate better data or more data, or mobilize a bigger labor force for science. But I want to emphasize something else. Citizen science is certainly about education and science literacy, but also about civic engagement, community building, and social transformation. Of course, the term citizen in citizen science is contested. It can sound exclusionary, and it is. Many now prefer participatory science or community science as a label, but others, including me, very pragmatically, still use the term citizen science as it is the more widely recognized label. Policymakers are now knowing about it and they like it, while keeping these limitations in mind. Sheila Jasanoff, among many others, has argued that societies have their own civic epistemologies, which are shared ways of establishing credibility, legitimacy, and trust in knowledge claims. This means science is always embedded in cultural and political context, and citizen science offers one way of making these epistemologies more transparent and participatory and connectable, also for social transformation. Citizen science also resonates with traditions of inquiry-based learning and critical pedagogy, encouraging students not only to learn facts, but to co-create questions and reflect on knowledge. Both traditions, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with them, both traditions emphasize that education is not about transferring facts, but about cultivating curiosity, critical awareness, and the ability to shape questions. And these are the core democratic skills. For young people, citizen science can take different forms and benefits. For children, it can spark early curiosity about the world. In secondary school, it can train critical thinking and collaborative problem solving. For youth activists, it can become a tool of making their voices heard in debates, in important debates for them about racism, climate change, health, or justice, and a way of challenging power relations. And there is certainly many other layers, but one to pick out is the teacher-researcher duality gap, or teacher-researcher communicator reality gap, because neither teachers nor researchers are very well trained as facilitators or mediators between the scientific world and the school world or the classroom. So probably teachers are much better at this, their role in guiding students through participatory projects is therefore crucial, but it also raises questions about support, training, and sustainable partnerships between institutions. For educational institutions, citizen science raises structural questions. How can schools make room in crowded curricula? How can universities value outreach and participation alongside publication and grants and patents? These are not trivial issues, and they go to the heart of how we resource and reward democratic forms of knowledge production. I will not go further here, maybe we'll discuss parts of that in the discussion. As a jury member, as I said, for this year's European Citizen Science Prize, which will be awarded in a few hours' time, I was totally struck by the maturity and diversity of the field. Submitted projects ranged from biodiversity and air quality to disaster preparedness, food security, healthcare, and oral histories. Many of the projects centered community building, empowered marginalized voices, and worked closely with schools and young people, showing that citizen science today is not just about collecting data, but about learning to ask questions, reflecting on meaning, and connecting knowledge to societal challenges and power relations. Two of this year's three main citizen science prizes show just how central schools and education is. The Digital Communities Prize will go tonight to the anti-quake risk hunter community in Istanbul, Turkey, where residents worked with schools and authorities to map danger zones and improve earthquake preparedness. Is anyone from the project here? Not yet. The Diversity and Collaboration Prize will go to the project Museum of Food Waste, where pupils, teachers, and canteen staff and suppliers work together to cut food waste in schools. Christina Neva will be shortly here sitting with us. And then there is also a third project which I picked out. It's also funded by Sparkling Science. We'll come back to that in a bit. An Austrian project where pupils and teachers together create what should be the curriculum, what the learning paradigms should be, and how to make mathematics maybe more sustainable also and robust for the pupils themselves. So all these projects exemplify how citizen science brings together pupils and teachers, using a lot of innovative methods and formats, also digital ones, along with other actors from and around educational institutions, all of them collaborating with researchers in producing scientific knowledge. That is important. It's not just systematic knowledge, but it's also knowledge that can be taken up in further scientific knowledge production. And the ambition is often to reach beyond the school and contribute to decision-making, policy, and broader societal change. Not only the Citizen Science Prize, but also several scoping reviews demonstrate that research on citizen science with children and young people has grown rapidly, and Chris also mentioned that, showing strong educational benefits from scientific literacy and critical thinking, which was already mentioned, to what we would call civic agency and environmental awareness. There's a lot of reviews, scoping reviews, that highlight all the different forms of youth engagement, from simple data collection to active participation. But what genuinely remains rare is co-creation, and also, of course, the STEM topics are mostly prominent. Impacts of citizen science in schools is very hard to measure. It's not something, especially then the further life pathways of the pupils, that is easy to follow and to know about. So but for us, it would actually be really be interesting to know more about the impacts on the people's lives, on the youth of the young people's lives, experiences and motivation. The next thing that is very hard to measure is the impact on democratic learning and agency, as we know from all other fields, not only in schools. But nevertheless, these things can be captured in evaluation formats like storytelling, and this is really interesting to learn. I'm coming back to that in a moment. So maybe we should be clear. Science is not democracy. Science is not democratic. in its core activities. Scientific facts are not decided by popular vote. We cannot determine in a town hall whether a particle exists, whether climate change is happening, or whether a vaccine is effective in which ways. These claims are all established through evidence, experimentation, and collective validation by expert communities. But this does not mean that public voices and concerns can simply be dismissed, especially in times like now. Critical voices, skeptical stances, even disillusionment with science cannot be reduced to mere uninformed noise. They often express deeper socio-political tensions about trust, legitimacy, and whose knowledge counts. Austria, for example, is among the countries where science consistently enjoys relatively low public prestige. There are many reasons for that, from historical experiences to the politicization or weaponization of expertise to contemporary populist narratives. And we cannot go into them in detail here, but the point is that the authority of science is never given, and also the scientists should remember that. It's never given once and for all. It needs to be continuously negotiated in society. So science is not separate from society, and it is in society, and thus here where we are, thankfully, in democracy. Moreover, democracy enters science in different places. It's in the framing of the question, in who has access and participates in education and inquiry, in how uncertainty is communicated and handled, and in whose knowledge is considered legitimate over time. Justice is at stake here. Citizen science can, of course, reinforce hierarchies when participants are treated merely as data collectors in a top-down fashion. But it can also open up possibilities for recognizing diverse forms of knowledge and civic epistemologies: experiential, local, indigenous, and youth knowledge. As Donna Haraway has argued with her notion of situated knowledges, all knowledge is produced from specific standpoints, and citizen science can make these positions visible and actionable, rather than pretending to speak from nowhere, if some of you are familiar with this idea of the God's perspective that science still likes to take. So the point is not to democratize truth, but to democratize inquiry. And this brings me to the point of citizen science as a learning paradigm. Citizen science teaches more than facts. It cultivates problem solving in collectives, critical thinking, targeted collaboration, and perhaps most importantly, the ability to ask good questions when certainty has not yet been established, when knowledge authority might be contested. Coming always back like a mantra, learning to ask questions, it is itself a democratic skill. It requires all these things like curiosity, attentiveness, and the courage also to admit what we don't know. From my own work, but also from all the great work of citizen science advocates here in the room, around the world, I've seen how projects can be transformative, not only for participants, but also for institutions and whole communities. They show us that science can be reoriented towards solidarity, responsibility, and care. And this is true also for basic sciences, not for just applied sciences. But we have to be realistic. It's hard work, and some say it's double work in research realms, and some say it's triple work in education contexts. But I can tell you it's totally worth it. So a good example of how worth it is, and I'm also not going here into more, because we'll hopefully hear from the colleague in the discussion later, from Elisabeth. A very good example is the long-running, internationally renowned, and we are very proud here in Austria of that program called Sparkling Science. For many years, it already funded school-based citizen science, and there's a lot of different topics. We'll hear about that later. And the interesting thing for me as a science studies scholar is there are evaluations. And it's quite interesting to look what the students are reporting. And the students reported not only greater scientific literacy, but veritably a stronger sense of agency, altered frames of reference, closer ties to their communities of interest, and more confidence in asking their own critical questions. Teachers found new ways to connect curricula with societal challenges, and researchers gained a lot of experiences in more robust forms of inquiry. This shows that citizen science in schools, if there is time and space for it, which is the big problem, can generate useful knowledge and foster transformative learning. So more generally speaking, what kinds of benefits and impacts can citizen science bring? For participants, it's skills, empowerment, a sense of belonging and agency. For schools, new ways of connecting learning with real-world issues, interdisciplinarity, project-based learning. For communities, visibility, sometimes even more than that, agency and influence on policy. And for science, it can bring a lot too. Citizen science provides not only data, but also new perspectives and forms of validation. By opening research to wider publics, it can help produce more socially robust knowledge. Knowledge that gains strength not only through experimental replication, but also through its responsiveness to diverse experiences, contexts, and needs. Citizen science also creates a lot of challenges, some of which I've already touched upon. How do we ensure equity of access, especially in under-resourced schools? We do see definitely more citizen science in well-equipped institutions in richer areas. How do we manage expectations when results are uncertain? And connected to that, what are the right means to make this agency, the young people feel, sustainable? And how do we handle conflicts when there are different interests that collide? We need to stress the point, conflicts and disagreements are not failures. In fact, they are both central to science and democracy. Learning to engage with disagreement productively is one of the most important lessons citizen science can offer. And again, as Chantal Mouffe reminds us, conflict is not a failure of democracy, but its very condition. The same holds for science. Disagreement is what makes knowledge robust. So, channeled through systematic forms of knowledge production, disagreement can become a productive force. Mouffe would call this agonistic pluralism, the recognition that disagreement and contestation are necessary. Citizen science can embody this by turning disagreements over data, methods, interpretation into opportunities for collective learning and action. But it's important to note that the scientific methods, of course, seeks consensus, but not in this idea of a rationalist truth. Rather, as a provisional agreement reached through contestation and evidence. Citizen science brings this process closer to the public, showing students that disagreement and negotiation are integral to how knowledge and democracy both work. So coming to a conclusion, can citizen science teach democracy? Not in the sense we would traditionally think about teaching, but in a more relevant way, yes, as a practice space. Citizen science can train and cultivate democratic sensibilities, curiosity, critique, responsibility, solidarity, and care. Like democracy itself, citizen science is very imperfect, sometimes highly fragile, but also very transformative. From the many, many projects that are out there, we see that it allows young people to see themselves not just as passive learners of facts, but as active contributors to knowledge and to society. As Bruno Latour once put it, democracy is about negotiating with both humans and non-humans. Citizen science does exactly this, bringing people, data, environments into new relationships. And that, I would argue, is definitely one of the most valuable lessons we can offer in uncertain times like today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Katja, and I'd like to just invite you to take a seat and also to invite our three additional speakers to the stage. To begin with, we'll have a round of introductions just through our three newcomers, and then we'll jump into our conversation. I have a few questions prepared for myself, but there may be time towards the end to perhaps pass this over to any questions from the audience. So I think we should just go down the line and start with Anna, and we'll move on just down the line. There you go.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Anna Bertisuman, and speaking about a frightening subject, I'm a lawyer, and generally lawyers are not seen so positively by society, but I'm actually an environmental lawyer. And I've been deeply inspired by my first job, which was in the Amazon rainforest in Ecuador, where I saw the first example of citizen science, essentially people, ordinary people, engaging with civic monitoring to document a long-lasting environmental crime. And this really motivated in my career. Unfortunately, it was after the university, but if I would have discovered this during my school age, I would have definitely gone for a different career path. But I decided to study law, legal studies, and throughout my career, I've been both working with citizen scientists and researching citizen science to understand how civic evidence can be mobilized to demonstrate environmental issues in courts, so really in judicial spaces, but also through mediation processes. And the compelling nature of this topic made me, over the time, engage with school, generally middle to high schools, in order to share concepts such as the right to access environmental information, the right to participate in environmental decisions with young adults and people that one day may need to know these rights to exercise agency. I funded a project called Sensing for Justice, which is about supporting civil society to gather relevant evidence that can be used to enforce the right to a healthy environment. And I work, aside from my research career, as a lawyer supporting climate and environmental litigation. So I'm really eager to hear your thoughts on this, but also the other panelists' thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There you go. No. Christina.
Hello all, my name is Cristina. I am a biologist from Portugal, and I'm representing here Unaiva team. We are a small NGO based more specifically in Esposende, which is a city located in the north of Portugal, like 50 kilometers from Porto. Very nice to visit if you have the chance. So, and we are an NGO, we do a lot of activities related with nature protection. We work a lot with the community, with schools, and we have the privilege to be awarded with the Diversity and Collaboration Award. We are very, very happy with our project. MOF Waste is the Museum of Food Waste. Why we call it a museum? Because food waste should be in the past nowadays, and we continue to talk in food waste nowadays. This was a project that basically monitored food waste in 2 cities of Portugal, Esposende and Viana do Castelo, 6 schools, and we worked with schools, with children aged 10 to 15 years old. And it was not only monitor, but also integrate the thematic in the curriculum. So it was a big project, and I think I will have the opportunity to further elaborate. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chris, for introducing us, and thank you, Katja. You made my job now really easy introducing myself. My name is Elisabeth. I'm working with the OEAD. We are a public agency, and in the public science department that I'm working with, we are mainly focused on creating connections between education institutions, research, and broader society. And some of the projects that have been running for many years that we are coordinating have to do with citizen science and are geared towards schools, but not exclusively. So you've heard and seen the Sparkling Science program that has been the most long-running one since 2007, and 360 projects that have since been running very open from all kinds of research perspectives and all school ages. Apart from the Sparkling Science program, we are also conducting a yearly research competition, the Citizen Science Award, which is open basically to everyone, but also encourages schools to participate in a selection of citizen science projects every year. I can maybe go into the incentives to do that later. And we are also coordinating in Austria mainly, but also internationally, working with people who are interested in those topics, both from a research perspective, but also educators, to further the topic, to work on trainings, to work on materials, to make it easier for schools and researchers to enter those collaborations in citizen science.
Thank you very much. And to build upon just the very interesting keynote that Katja presented before, it presented me with an idea of, I can't remember if I heard this on a podcast or if it was in my education, but the idea of carpenters versus gardeners, where if you're a gardener, you let, in context of teaching or psychology perhaps, gardeners, you see what grows. You plant seeds of varying types, and you see what develops and what interests grow from your field or your garden. Whereas if you're a carpenter, you have a piece of wood and you try and carve it into something very specific. And I'm just wondering, relating this back to citizen science and within like an education framework, how would you bring, I wondered if you could talk about just your opinions on how to bring citizen science into the curriculum, into these environments. Is it bringing them a topic that they should perhaps bring them a topic that they can work on, and to perhaps include these into multiple different types of lessons or different contexts, or allowing them perhaps to create their own project on what they are interested in, which obviously is much trickier, but perhaps provides a better voice for those young people, both at schools, but also at higher education. With primary schools, you're somewhat presented with topics that you learn, whereas at university, you start developing your own voice about what you're interested in. But I'm just wondering if anyone had any thoughts about the best ways of effectively integrating these into the curriculum or into schools or educational spaces in general. Oh, you go.
Well, I think it's possible. This was the case for our project, the MOF Waste. First of all, this is what we thought it would be important, was to analyze the curriculum. It was very important also to discuss with the teachers and to understand if the activity or the idea of the project was interesting for them, for the students. So analyzing the curriculum and discussing, I think, is the first step. And the other, just to make in the case of the MOF Waste, just to let you know, we managed to work in the school, the team, like nine different subjects. So it is possible and to incorporate the team in an interdisciplinary way. Just to give you an example, the kids collecting the data on food waste, they were analyzing the data in mathematics, but could also explore the thematic in Portuguese classes, in provoking the other students of the schools, making articles for disseminating the results of the project, but could also be worked in visual arts. So I think if the teachers are really interested in shifting the way they teach, I think it is possible. It's possible. I don't know how.
Maybe I can add a thought, because the curriculum might be one way to get in, but it's not necessarily the only way. For example, in Austria, you've heard there's been a long-standing cooperation between schools and researchers in that citizen science kind of way. without citizen science being specifically in the curriculum. But what we've heard from schools and from the researchers is more so that it needs to fit whatever is of interest to the schools, or that is providing some incentive, right? So for example, if a school is part of a longer research project, there needs to be a lot of deliberation how that is actually introduced into the school lesson plan in the school year. So there's a lot logistically to think about. But there is this incentive to then be part of this research program, to maybe also get some funding, to have some hours funded for the teachers who are contributing to this. So this could be one incentive, to be funded, to be then also recognized for the work that is done. For a shorter term participation, for example, that we have in the Citizen Science Award, it could be that there is very specific materials already at hand that can be easily applied, for example, in biology or in language classes, so that the teachers don't have to do a lot of additional work, but can still expose the students to like this research-based learning. And what the teachers always say is that it's important to really work with them to have a good grasp on the needs of the classroom, rather than just thinking through the curricula and see how that is on a policy level, so to speak.
I can just briefly jump in saying that a method that I saw very effective to really put the students kind of before the eventual school's interest was to organize this so-called sensorial walk, in particular across contested sites, for example, a polluted water stream, or near to a factory for those schools that were situated, for example, close to an industry. And my approach was just observing through this sensorial walk, which is done in silence, which for students may be very challenging, but then they start enjoying the silence, and in a way, just with a guided sensorial walk, which may be a sound walk if the problem is sound, can be a drawing walk if the problem is built infrastructure. Then there is a moment of restitution where you can really understand what the students feel more as problematic or also interesting. And then from there, with the school, try to think along, and putting the senses before the rationality also help a bit deconstruct this idea of, I'm not an expert in this, so I cannot, for example, monitor pollution. And it proved to be quite effective in schools that didn't manage to open up topics freely compared to others where, for example, there were not such contested issues. So maybe in certain conditions, special, this may work.
Thank you. And it seems a little, for talking from my own context a little bit, science communication has started to be integrated into into university courses that are revolving around science as well, not just for courses that are focusing just on those that want to do communication, but as a core prospect of all science, and having that part of the curriculum in becoming an academic, I suppose. And I know that this is a slightly different context with citizen science, but it sounds a little like we want to start to integrate these concepts and these practices into wider lesson plans and to wider infrastructures to have these ideas start to be cemented in at an earlier stage. I'm just wondering what resources can be made available to schools. You mentioned previously, Stephanie, about that you've created resources and funding, and mentioning what Katia said in her keynote about areas of low science capital, or areas that don't have the funding or the opportunities that perhaps a more well-funded school in a richer part of town, if I'm going to just put it bluntly, might have. And I'm just wondering what resources or avenues are available to make these sort of initiatives available to schools with low science capital, or just low capital in general. Science capital is a little bit of a science communication sort of thing, so I apologize for that. But yeah, what can we do to ensure that if we want to open up citizen science and to have these avenues for these young people to have their voices heard, how can we not fall into the trap that lots of other citizen science is, that we're not just preaching to the crowd, those people that go to science clubs already, or to institutions that already are quite well adapted to go the extra mile for their students, if they have the resources to do so.
Maybe I can speak on this from like the funding perspective, because I think it is crucial that we don't just take on framings of particular schools or regions as maybe low science capital or something like that, because I think that would reinforce ideas of what these schools can contribute or what they would be interested to be working on, right? So, and it's always tricky because you have to name realities, but not kind of put people, like real people and real pupils and teachers in a corner. So we are working more with the notion of periphery. So that could be geographical, it could mean low infrastructure, it could mean lower funding basis. And in the Sparkling Science projects, at least, there is now, or has been since the relaunch, the opportunity for projects to acquire more funds when they work with schools that are either peripheral in some way and can be shown to be that, or has not previously been part of like research-based learning or citizen science, because that removes that stigma, but still opens up a way to talk about that we need more maybe time, or we need more financial resources to build that infrastructure, to have coordinators who are introducing that into the schools that have not worked like this before. So I think there has to be an incentive to go towards the schools. And from the teacher side, if there is, for example, a teacher training that is officially recognized, I guess in most systems teachers have to still do some further trainings after they're in service. And if that is officially recognized, and it's on citizen science, that is something, a way in for them to explore without having to fully commit, but that is, I think, relatively easy for them to talk about and bring that into the school, even if the school has not worked in that realm before.
Can I add something here? Just because we're sitting in Linz at Ars Electronica, I think Ars Electronica is a quite interesting model. I'm not super up to date whether it's still there, but I learned several years ago that Ars Electronica has this model of Ars Electronica ambassadors, which are teachers in schools. And I think this is a very wise decision to have, because you need to foster also partnerships. And I totally agree that you have to get the peripheral schools inside too, but you also have to reward those schools that stick with it, right? And to build up the expertise with the teachers. And I think this is the next level. It's not just the institution, but on the level of getting the teachers on board is not only providing them with material or interesting learning pathways or paradigms, but also to build a community of them. And I think Ars Electronica has demonstrated that this is actually working out very well, and I think it could be a very good model also for teacher community building.
Anything to add?
Just to tell that the place where we implemented MOF waste, we can consider that is a low science capital, because we don't have research centers in Esposende. So when we think that when the schools are open to the community, there are a lot of opportunities that arise. So, and at the end, those low science capitals sometimes are the more interested in joining this kind of projects, I think, because they don't have much opportunities like in a big one center, just to add this.
And moving from what you just said, Christina, is the idea of making this a mutually beneficial experience for both the teachers or the students that are participating, or the undergraduates, and also with these research institutions, I suppose. So I'm just wondering if, I suppose for undergraduates, they could perhaps incorporate this into their studies as part of their degree process, and that might be part of their final submission paper or something along those lines. But for primary and secondary students, I suppose they could try and broach a topic, but most of the time I imagine they will need some institution or some other body to provide some of this framework for them to effectively do this research. I'm just wondering how we can ensure that both the students get something out of it, but the information that is being reported is viable, is useful for driving this, for having these people, having these young people be a part of something that might drive policy change, that might drive even changes in their own school, I suppose, if in that instance. But I'm just wondering how best it would be to approach this with a mutual learning or mutual benefit approach, I suppose.
Well, I think one of the most important things that we can do is to train the students, train the teacher, capacitate them, share scientific expertise so they can feel confident in being part of the scientific process. Providing materials, I think, would be one of the biggest, the most important things. Don't know if you want to add more. Basically, in my opinion,
I believe also fostering curiosity, and because I think many students have quite a big question mark on what does a scientist do actually, or a lawyer or an investigator or a journalist. And I think citizen science could really be a way to also reapproach, like bring closer students of any age to institutions doing things. And I saw this, so the Sensing for Justice project was developed at the European Commission Joint Research Center, which was a former nuclear center and then became a EU Science Center. So it's the Science for Policy Center. When it opened the doors to school students, they are amazed because they start unpacking the concept of science. What does a policymaker do? And I think stimulating curiosity through example, and as indeed Katja was suggesting, this idea of practicing values and practicing questions, practicing disagreement, having the daily life taste, which is something that you can do, I would say, through, for example, shadowing modules. So where, for example, a young student who engaged in a citizen science on radiation then joins a scientific institution working on radiation for their short internship, for example, these hours of pre-labor secondment. So I think we should be creative and to stimulate curiosity and explore all the arrays of possible partnerships, of course, safely and considering the resources scarcity. We need to be very creative, but I would say citizen science really offer a good opportunity to practice this. Yeah.
And I think for some topics, at least, it's quite easy to imagine how this is a true benefit working with schools and young people. For example, in some projects that we fund, it has an educational research kind of focus, right? And for example, Mate Connect, which was on the slides before. So it makes sense, also from a research perspective, to involve people who are educated in that way, to question and then generate data and then question again what is being done. For example, a project here in Linz that has just concluded, the Circus of Knowledge has worked with mainly very young students in primary school who did artistic research on science education. So there was theater and music and the other arts as well, as far as I'm aware. So the school children were doing artistic research, but were also in a longitudinal study. It was data that was really important to gather, was being gathered and published also, which showed that there is a real benefit for collaboration in the classroom, for example. If that is your research question, how else would you get to that point of finding that out, if not by involving the people in school? For other projects or other topics, it might be a bit more removed, or it seems more that it fits a specific discipline, biology, for example, or the languages. And then it can be good to be really clear about what is our objective from the beginning and involve educators, youth group leaders in the formation of the questions, because if the questions don't fit the school or the children, it might be hard and it might clash. But it's still possible, still for topics that have not necessarily to do with school, for people who are younger to really contribute in a very sustainable and you know, a very big way. We just have to be realistic, and maybe we can talk about like the conflicts that come up as well. They have to be realistic about what can be done in those systems, right?
It's all about recognizing different sorts of expertise. I think this is really important. And every child has certain forms of expertise, every young adult, every undergraduate. It's all there. And we need to build, and also scientists need to learn that. It's not easy to understand these different sorts of knowledge types. And I think this is most important. And when this works, then all these connections can happen immediately, I think.
No, I think it's really important, that aspect that you're talking about, just across the board really, that these expertise and this knowledge is valid. It's a data point that is often overlooked, and these opinions and facts do feed into the experiences of these lived people, these young people, these teachers, their extended families. And with citizen science, you can inform one person and it causes a ripple effect of being communicated from that child or from that student to their friends, to their parents, to their grandparents, to their grandparents' friends. And it causes a knock-on effect of getting these topics into the zeitgeist a little bit more, and to perhaps get that fed into an equal partnership of knowledge exchange, I suppose. Something that Katia mentioned earlier on is the idea of, it was about how objective truth, I suppose. And I feel a bit dirty saying this because I know I'm being slightly hyperbolic, but in that truth can be relative. Like, depending on if you can explain yourself enough, truth is relative, and feelings don't care about your facts, and facts don't care about your feelings. All these ideas are linked to the lived experience of the people that may not have much of a science background in their family and that sort of thing. So having these avenues to, I don't know, to question what they know, but to also have that critical thinking of, this is why I think that. And if someone presents me with different information, I can change that, but I have a knowledge base of why I've made those decisions and the knock-on effect that might have on just a wider community, I suppose. And that somewhat just links back to this idea of being an active citizen and the democracy of it all. And I'm just wondering what sort of skills do you think need to be at the forefront for these young people to really become more active citizens, and to what citizen science can provide to these young people to, I don't know, to better understand, A, the democracy of science, or the lack thereof, as you said, Katia, but kind of to integrate these, even if you're not interested in science, learning from these practices of critical thinking, of collaboration, of working within conflicts, I'm just wondering if you could give some examples of how these, or some actual like working examples perhaps, which you've worked in, on how these have managed to feed into, I don't know, personal development and civic kind of civic growth. I'm not sure if that's the word I'm looking for, but I'm sticking with it.
Conflict is an important term here.
Conflict.
I can jump in sharing, let's say, an experience that is pretty situated, which is of citizen science around oil extraction in the south of the north, so in south of Italy, in Basilicata, which is actually a big European oil extraction hub, although many people in Europe and in Italy do not know about it. And engaging schools in actually it was more both citizen science and citizen data science, because it was also about, and I found it very clever, teach students how to study data on the use of the royalties from the oil company and how these royalties were invested or claimed to be invested in certain infrastructure projects, which in the end actually were not performed. So there was this expectation and facts. And the ability of these students to engage with this data made them kind of wake up from a long tradition that they heard that oil was a blessing in their villages or in their regions. And so it interestingly created also these tensions across generations with youngsters resisting the path to, for example, go to work for the oil company. And another very interesting finding that so I didn't develop itself the citizen science project because I was a researcher on these projects. I observed them developing, is that from the citizen science project, a kind of spin-off initiative was a participatory epidemiology. Through a very famous epidemiologist in Italy was embracing participatory epidemiology, Annibale Bigeri. And he ran this Lucas project, which was really about bringing epidemiology to schools, because these people really live daily with the health impacts of oil extraction. And this also showed a bit this notion of environmental impact as holistic, so going from the economy to tourism to culture to health, apart from the actual tangible environmental impact. So definitely being critical, but also reflecting on the rights that they had and they had kind of forgotten about. And I don't think as a teacher you can make a big difference if the person doesn't want to respond to it, so you still will navigate a lot of frustration and counterfacts, but still you have this, 30% of the students that have their click that change their lives. And I think for these tiny numbers that will multiply, we really need to keep doing it.
Mm-hmm. Go for it.
Again, the case of moth waste, we felt a behavioral change in the beginning of the project while we were communicating the thematic with the students, they were kind of apathic in relation with the food waste. Like some of them would say, okay, we know that there is food waste in our school, but what we can do with it? So they felt like they were not considered in their school. So, sorry, and when they started to collect the data, imagine in one day 50 kilos of waste in the garbage, they started to be shocked about the numbers, and at the end they really want to act. So, and they started to make recommendations. So this for me, in my opinion, this is that shift that we are talking about. They were critical about the thematic. They really wanted to do something about it. So this is the power of citizen science.
What teachers told us repeatedly is that being part of a citizen science project challenges like the logic of a school day in a very beautiful way. So it's less focused on input output. You might listen and study, or you might not, and then you read the test and you get a grade. Rather forming something ideally where the students feel a sense of responsibility or develop a task or something that they contribute that's not only for them or their own grade, but really has an impact on all the others involved, on the researchers, maybe also on the teachers, and that can lead to, for example, then working more on eye level, and that can be really empowering for students coming out of the rather hierarchical school logic, right? So it can challenge that. It can also give an opportunity for students who are gifted in one way or the other to kind of show that in a way that the normal school they wouldn't necessarily allow, and then also for others to champion them. So one teacher told us she was running a citizen science project with her students, and it was coming to an end, and they were having this big event in the region to present the results, and the way that they set it up was also in an artistic way, something theatrical. And there was one student who was really gifted and then also went on to become an actor, and he was the one who had a major role to kind of in this presentation. And at the very last moment he kind of backed out and he was like, no, I'm not doing this. And so all of the other students were really invested in him doing this thing because they all work together to kind of collaboratively show what they have done. So this is like a way that they take on responsibility that is maybe not encouraged otherwise in a normal school day. So I think this is something that develops in a citizen science project if done right, and if people can really express their own talents and go into it in a way that's interesting to them.
I suppose it provides these projects, it provides these young people with an avenue to, as Anna mentioned before, to expand, pardon me, to expand their horizons and to almost like this third space where they can consider these different thoughts and to develop themselves as people, I suppose. And we talk about kind of becoming the civic opportunities of becoming a more democratic, more active member of society, but also as an opportunity for these young people to know what they care about, I suppose. It gives I didn't know this about the oil fields and the environment. I now have a better understanding, and this is something I'd like to follow up on and to, I don't know, to apply more of my social battery towards. This is what I want to do either as a job or in my spare time. This is my passion a little bit, I suppose. And I'm just wondering if, the transient property of these young people becoming more activists, I suppose, and having that, I don't know, that strength of character and strength of opinion to drive, to allow them to think that their opinions matter and that they have the tools and they have and have been given the opportunity to, I don't know, express something that might generally be, I don't know, frowned upon, I suppose.
I would say the topic of activism is very divisive, especially for teachers. Several teachers that we encountered asked us to not be political, to not bring up divisive topics, because we really didn't want polarization in the school. And I understand this. So a strategy we used was to produce graphic novels. This is for example, one, and it tells the story that we witnessed in the site where we were working, but it doesn't mention the place. It actually talks about land, which is general, and also an oil company, which is kind of ideal. And what was interesting is that the graphic novel for them became an instrument for addressing complex matters. And so actually I discovered after 1 year presenting this in multiple schools, and the year after they asked me to ship like 300 copies, and I was like, okay. And then the year after, and then I understood, okay, in any case, it's a Creative Commons with open access, so everyone with a QR code, I just showed how to download it and use it. But interestingly, the schools had graphic novel laboratories to discuss about, for example, violence in the families, or to discuss about problems linked to depression or alcoholism. And the idea of kind of bringing together science, a cultural matter like graphic novel, and tensions, conflicts, was a module that could be replicated in other contexts to engage with feelings of polarization, and also to show the foundations of those in the, for example, classes that were activists, for example, against certain environmental injustice or gender injustices. So I would say we shouldn't shy away, as we said at the start, from conflicts, and eventually even polarization is not good, but at least making this concept explode, these conflicts explode. And I'm actually trained as an environmental mediator, and I think one of the key elements to foster mediation, conflict mediation, is really to put all the cards on the table, explode the conflicts, and foster deep listening. So really trying to listen why this person is so upset, is so hungry. So I would say spaces like Ars Electronica, in my view, are opportunities to really make these creative connections between this type of topics, education and art. So I also welcome all the artists in the room, if any, to work with lawyers, with citizen scientists, with journalists, with teachers, because I believe that art is a great space and approach to make these frictions a bit more manageable also in schools. Yeah.
Thank you.
And ideally, all pupils who are exposed to a project then catch on fire and are into it and become ambassadors of the topic. But I want to challenge that a bit, because of course that can happen, and I think the better managed and set up a project is, the more likely it can become. But what we hear from teachers, and I think it is also kind of systemic, is that you have to expect that there is a part of your class that will not be interested at all. And depending on what the incentive is to participate, that has to be okay to some extent, because, I mean, in citizen science overall, one of the standard principles is that this participation is completely voluntary, right? You are not forced to do it whatsoever, you just participate out of your own free will, which, if you put it in a school context, especially when whole classes, for example, participate or are asked to participate, is kind of uneasy to, because we don't apply the same standard of being there super voluntarily to the school children. So I think there has to be a realistic wager between really finding the things that most young people or the young people in front of you care about, and what can be interesting to them, but also not forcing them to kind of be an activist or ambassador for everything that you put in front of them, because they are still people in their own right and they can decide if that's interesting to me, especially if they're in this school system, right?
I suppose I go. Oh, go for it. Go.
That's the nice thing about science. I mean, we are not all activists in science, right? So, and that's the nice thing. There's so many different roles you can take up, right? Whether it's data collection or whether it's asking those people that maybe don't want to participate, being the respondents then in the end for those who want to participate, and so on and so forth. So I think that's the beauty of it, that it's this collaboration and the different roles the pupils or young adults can take on.
Go for it.
I was remembering that when we started the Morphoist project, we needed to talk with the canteen staff, and food waste was a very sensitive thematic for them because they started to think what they want. They are questioning our practices. They will start weighting the waste. So it was very, very sensitive, and our approach was to be empathic with them. We really need. So we started to collect their practice, talking with them, and at the end they were really interested in even collecting the data with the kids and supporting the data collection. So in these situations, it can also be interesting to involve other members of the school ecosystem, because we think sometimes of schools in teachers and in students, but sometimes we forget the other layer, and they can be also agents of change, just to add this.
And I suppose I just wanted to ask if there's been any other experiences of, this would be a bit of a double-sided one, of if you'd like to share an experience of when you've had an additional friction point with a school or an organization you've worked with, and I don't know, just learning from that experience. But if you prefer, perhaps we can go into, I don't know, a success story, I suppose. I don't know if...
I can report something that is not a friction point we had, but what the project talked to us about, because we had an event about 2 years ago on conflicts and how they are managed in the projects, and then two were invited to speak on that and how they came up. And I think it was really interesting because one project, they were working on colonialism in the context of a natural science museum, and how colonialism can be found in those collections, but also what colonialism has to do with the students and their daily lives and so on. So this was kind of the setup of the project. And they reported that, of course, things that are out there that are discriminatory in society will also show up in your project. For example, there were instances of racist language being used, and that created tension between all of the people involved, the students, the researchers, the teachers, the museum staff. So that had to be negotiated, but it becomes visible, right? There is then an avenue to talk about. Also, what they reported is this kind of ageist problem that students were conducting their research around the museum, but then were held up by staff who probably didn't know them and were questioned what they were doing there, and then they had to kind of talk about that and address it. But I think the point that I'm trying to make is there will always be problems. So there's, I think, no problem, no project ever said it has been smooth sailing from beginning to end, and there was not something that we had to adjust. So if we set up projects with schools, I think there has to be a lot of room for flexibility to adjust, because things will come up as it is in any research project, but now you have more players that kind of have to agree on this.
I also want to share a story, but I don't know if my colleague is still here. Josep is not in the room anymore. We had a project called COACT, where one part was bringing young people that were dropping out of the school system, the training system, and the job system under 18 in Austria to analyze their own life situation. And the success story for me was not only how the big expertise they brought into the projects, the young people themselves, when they were looking at, for example, statistical indicators that were used to describe their situation. And they said, hey, come on, we need to get other data about our situation. But also how in the end, some of them, and it was not easy because most of them didn't come continuously, they dropped out of our project as well, but some of them made it to the end and were sitting with the policymakers on a table and were discussing their own situation in the face of policymakers, decision makers, and also the institutions and agencies that organize their, coming back into the system. And I think this was a great success, even though, and all the people gave us this feedback, also the young people, that for them this has changed a lot, that they were heard.
We're coming to the end of our allotted time. I just wanted to ask if anyone had any final thoughts or recommendations that they would like to share with the audience today. Or
one thought I have is that if we're talking about responsibility for a citizen science project, I think teachers, educators need to consider when to assess whether to open the school door to a citizen science project, that it will last much longer than the presence of the facilitator. And one of the troubles that I often encountered is this idea of externalizing the task to for example, to a researcher or an NGO or a university. And this is, I think, a bit the problem with citizen sciences school, the fact that I would say teachers really need to have enough time and mental space to fully enjoy the project, because after it has spillover effects that you may not have planned and still would require present educators that would bring the students to these other avenues, which can be a school protest or like a journalism project. So in a way, nurturing, ensuring that citizen science makes roots in the future of these young people entails having teachers very aware of the fact that it may be a just one-off project, but may also foster much more. And embracing this would really be the transformative change. And I believe many times the school system doesn't leave much, and I'm talking from the Italian perspective, so maybe in Austria is much better, doesn't leave so much space for, and I think many actually countries like Greece, for example, you just shared this experience with us, share the same problem of like shrinking space for teachers to think otherwise elsewhere. So let's claim the right to these spaces.
Just a quick thought, only to say that everyone can be a scientist, be confident with that, and be part and be participative. So that's it.
any thoughts on this side?
I think Christina just said it perfectly. So
I think that's unless Katya has anything to top that, I think that's a perfect way of ending this session. So thank you very much for listening, and thank you very much to our panel for their insights. Okay. Thank you very much.